Hello, everyone. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the British criminal, I suppose you must call him, Charles Bronson. Because, well, if you look at my channel, I'm a historic true crime channel. I talk about historic true crimes, and most of what I've spoken about is actually the Charles Manson case. And he's obviously an American case, isn't he? And a lot of people ask me, as you know, my audience is mainly American, and they ask me, are there any crimes like the Manson murders that happened in the UK? And it's really hard to say, actually, because there isn't quite anything like it, no, but there are like notorious prisoners like Charles Manson was, and they are people like this guy Charles Bronson, and the fact he's called Charles as well. I always wanted to talk about him, and he's recently been in the news because he's had a public parole hearing for the first time, and that's another interesting thing. It's historic because normally parole hearings are done in private, but there's been a change in the law, and Charles Salvador, as he's called now, is the only the second prisoner to ever have his parole hearing done in public, and he's just been turned down for parole. Because they can't, because the way he's categorized at the moment, he's a category A prisoner. So he was never going to just get let out the next day if he got parole. He needs to be downgraded to the next category. But they said he isn't ready, basically, for that, so he's been refused that. And then more drama has broken out over him again because the same day he got denied parole, a guy who's been claiming he was his son for the past 6 years and has been interviewed in documentaries and all sorts and has managed to get into a high-security prison claiming he's, Charles Bronson's son, has just admitted that it was a scam, and they both had they've conned the prison service and everything. They've conned the media and the prison service that he was Charles Bronson's son, and they've made loads of money basically out of it. And so that's more drama. Then that's quite Manson-esque as well, because Charles Manson has 1 million people claiming they're his son and all that sort of shit. It's quite funny. But yeah. And so there was kind of something I wanted to read out as well, because it's quite an important thing. And because I'm expecting more people to watch this on playback than watch it live, obviously. And Charles Bronson, because a lot of people are calling for him to be freed, and they're saying, it's unfair that he's not freed because there's like murderers and rapists and that who are free, and he's never killed anyone or raped anyone. So why isn't he free? And though it is true that he hasn't killed anyone, he has tried to kill people in prison. He is a very dangerous bloke still. We've got to remember this. He is a very violent man. We mustn't forget that. He's never killed anyone. He has tried and taken people hostage. He's taken 11 hostages in his time. He took an art teacher hostage for 2 days who's got PTSD now. He took a governor hostage, and the hostage thought he was going to be killed, and he has PTSD now. And also he's an armed robber. Being a victim of armed robbery can give people PTSD. So it wasn't... People talk about him like he's not done anything wrong. Just because he's not a murderer, that doesn't mean he's not a bad person. He's not done bad things. And that said, there are criminals who have done much worse than he ever did, who are walking free now. And the reason he's held in prison is he's a problem that they created. But we get to that when we're talking. But yes, and just another point about this. While I was researching this, I was watching videos on Sean Atwood's channel, and I saw Dave Courtney. Dave Courtney's like another old criminal guy who does, because there's like a criminal circuit of all our old Cockney criminals that talk. And he's one of these guys, and he did a video where he's talking about where he met Charles Bronson while they were on remand together in some prison. So I don't know how Dave Courtney ended up in such a high security prison. But he apparently met Charles Bronson in one of these things. And when Sean Atwood asked him, do you think Charles Bronson will ever be released? He says no, because he's basically a political prisoner like the Cray twins or Ronnie Biggs was. Oh, sorry, just to the chat. How old is he? He's about 70 now, I think. Or in his early 70s, 70 years old, yeah. But he said he won't be released because the Cray twins both died in prison, or Ron died in prison and Reggie got released on compassionate grounds when he was so ill he couldn't get out of bed, sort of thing. And do the Americans even know who Ronnie Biggs is? I'll probably have to explain who Ronnie Biggs is. Don't you know what the Great Train Robbery was? The Great Train Robbery happened, I think it was, oh fucking hell, was it this? late 60s, I think the mid 60s, the Great Train Robbery happened. Some men robbed the Royal Mail, basically, and people gave a shit more about that back in this day and age, and so like they treated it like they'd robbed the Queen personally, and these men were handed like ridiculously huge sentences for armed robbery. And one of them, called Ronnie Biggs, managed to escape from prison. It was in the 60s. Yeah. Yes, and the crate. Yeah, well, I'm going to get to this. Yeah, I'm making a point here, right? But I've just got to explain to you who Ronnie Biggs is, so you know. But Ronnie Biggs managed to escape from prison really easily. It made the prison service look like twats, basically. His mates they were out in the prison yard doing exercise, and his mates just pulled up outside the prison and threw a rope ladder over the wall. And he got on the rope ladder and they pulled it up over the wall, and he got over the wall and was gone. And the guards just stood there going, "Oh no, we've never seen this rope ladder trick before," and let him go, basically. And he managed to get out of the country to Brazil, I think he went to, where there's no extradition. And so he basically escaped from prison and made the prison service look like a bunch of twats. And so he obviously humiliated everyone. And he did actually manage to stay in Brazil for a couple of decades, but eventually they dragged him back and they did put him in prison. Him in the end, but when he was really, really ill and he ended up dying in a nursing home. But yeah, he didn't have like any quality freedom in the end. They did put him in prison. But basically, the point is Dave Courtney compared Charles Bronson to people like the Cray twins and Ronnie Biggs. But the point is, the Cray twins really were very violent. Ronnie Cray was very dangerously insane. He was schizophrenic, and it's being revealed now as well. There was a lot covered up at the time. I'd like to cover the Cray twins because people ask me about, is there anything like the Manson murders? And the Cray twins aren't exactly like the Manson murders because they weren't a cult, but in terms of there being famous people involved and there being cover-ups and shit like that, the Cray twins is quite an intense story, so I'm going to get into the Cray twins as well. But they were blackmailing people from the House of Lords and shit like that, So, and that's why they got away with running their criminal empire for as long as they did. And so they're a tremendous embarrassment to the government. Yeah, so that's why they kept them in prison and they let them die in prison. But the reason Charles Bronson is not the same as them is, right, basically, he was just a normal armed robber. And we'll get into his diagnosis later. Yeah, I want to get into it, but fucking his diagnosis would be different nowadays anyway in that. But he was just pretty much an average armed robber, and it's something about the penal system that turned him into a violent criminal. He wasn't that violent, though armed robbery is a violent offence, right? He wasn't actually that violent a man. It's something about being in prison that turned him into the violent person that he was. And so, they can't keep him like a political prisoner, like they did the Crays or like they did Ronnie Biggs, because he never really did anything to humiliate anyone, But since he's been in prison and he's been abused by the prison system, he has done big protests and he's climbed up on the roof of Broadmoor and trashed the roof and shit like that. But actually, no, he had legitimate reason to protest. Broadmoor was an absolute shithole. I'm going to get into this, right? And he actually, it's hard to, well, I'll get into it, yeah. But basically, you can't compare Charles Bronson to Ronnie Biggs and the Crays, because they had actually, they were really serious criminals, and everything that Charles Bronson became, he became because of the penal system. So they caused the problem themselves, So they have to take that now, and they have to deal with that, and they have to accept that. And it does sound like they are starting to, from what they've said about his parole hearing. But yeah, they have to accept that they are the reason that Charles Bronson is the way he is now, because he wasn't as bad as the Cray twins or even probably Ronnie Biggs, Yeah, so he was never a great criminal. He got caught every time. He actually wasn't even that violent outside of prison. It's only when he's in prison he becomes so insanely violent, which shows the prison system created him. And this is because of the way the system used to work and the way we diagnosed people in those days. Yeah, because he was actually a juvenile prisoner. I didn't realise that as well. But yeah, he first got into trouble when he was a teenager. And back in those days, they treated criminals like they were different. They talked about the criminal brain, and they used terms like criminal retardation and stuff like that. And this created an us against them atmosphere within the prison service, And so, the criminals felt like they had to fight against the sort of against the psychiatrists and against the guards. And instead of rehabilitating people, it just made them more violent. And that's the effect it had on Charles Bronson in a very extreme way. And so and so it was that and the fact that we actually literally treated these people as if they were different, which we don't anymore. We fully understand now that there is no such thing as a criminal brain. These are people that have committed a crime. They are not like a different breed to anyone else. You know what I mean? And it's that mentality that made him the way he is. And he's an embarrassment to the penal system because they made him and they can't deal with him, basically. You know what I mean? Because so he's a result of the penal system. And now the tragic thing is now he is 70 years old and he has calmed down and he does want to be released. He's the staff shortages in the prison that he's in means that he can't even start the process of getting categorized down to another category because of the staff shortages. Basically, he can't be out of his cell long enough to be tested to see if he could cope with going into a more open prison environment, basically. And so that's the problem at the moment. And so if you really want him to be released and you want to campaign for his release, then you should fucking be looking at that. Yeah, Chopper Read as well. He is very similar to Chopper Read. Yes, isn't he Australian? Is he an Australian one? Yeah, he's but yeah, a similar thing to that. But I've created a timeline just to show you a little bit. Yeah, and there's events that I couldn't get a date for as well that I should talk to you about. Add that, yeah. So age 13, because his actual name was Michael Peterson before. He joins a gang of robbers and ends up in a juvenile detention centre. I don't know when he ends up in a juvenile detention centre. And then in 1974, he's in prison for armed robbery at the age of 22. And he gets more time added to his sentence. Oh, and I have this picture of him as well, look. Rare picture of him when he was young. This is him when he's from 1973, so this is the year before he did the armed robbery that got him sent down for the first time. And that's his actual son, obviously, that he had with his first wife. He would have only been, 21 years old there? Looks very different to how you see him look in years to come, obviously. And he's in prison for armed robbery at the age of 22. And more time gets added to his sentences for attacking other prisoners and guards. And he actually seriously wounds another guy with a glass jug at one point and that. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I've got a terrible cold. And his wife left him at this point because when she realised that he wasn't going to just get out after 7 years, she couldn't take it anymore, so she left him. And this is what sort of seems to have made him resign to becoming a violent prisoner, the worst prisoner ever, because he'd lost everything, and that's what drove him nuts. And he. Yes, and then in 1979, he gets moved from Parkhurst to Broadmoor. Yeah, because I'm trying to put a bloody timeline together of all the different prisons he's been in. Because I'm sure he says, because I've just read his book about Broadmoor, and I'm sure he says he was in Rampton before he was in Broadmoor. But it also says in the book he came from, because I live on the Isle of Wight. Parkhurst prison is on the Isle of Wight. Parkhurst prison is for people doing life sentences. And Ronnie Cray was in there at one time and everything. Yeah, they held a lot of famous prisoners. But then that got downgraded. That's another story for another stream, though. The security category of that got downgraded because 3 blokes escaped really easily. When I was a little girl, I remember that happening when there were the 3 fucking escaped. 2 of them were murderers and 1 was a rapist, escaped from Parkhurst prison. And they were at large for 3 days on the Isle of Wight, the island where I live. Yeah, but I'll get into that another day anyway. But yeah, Parkhurst. So he gets moved from Parkhurst prison in 1979 to Broadmoor, which brings us to his rooftop process. But let me show you these pictures first. That's him up on the roof there. Rare picture of him with hair as well and a beard. But this, people are saying the suit that he's wearing there looks like a clown suit or a jester suit. And yes, it's meant to, right? This is our high escape risk thing. They make the American prisoners wear the orange jumpsuit who are on death row or who are like high risk of running. For whatever reason, this is what they make ours wear, and this is because he does shit like the rooftop protest in the picture next door, because he's at risk of running and doing that. And on his back it would say HM prison, whatever prison he's from. And they do that deliberately. And they wonder why our penal system creates an us and them attitude and prisoners go nuts. But this was him as well. This was done to humiliate him totally. Because it was the first time he'd been seen in public for 15 years. But this was when he had assaulted the warden, though this is so that was very serious, obviously, and he got 5 years added to his sentence for that. But he served that now. But yeah, but that's the background behind the red and the fucking the yellow and the green outfit thing. That's our high escape risk thing. And these are more pictures of him doing his Broadmoor roof protest. I think this is the 1981 one that he did. And yeah, his name is still Mickey Peterson at this point. He doesn't change his name to Charles Bronson until sometime later. And just to give you an idea of the building, yeah, and the story of how he got to the roof is crazy as well. Right, this is the size of the buildings in Broadmoor. I couldn't find a picture of the exact block he climbed up. He climbed the Kent block. It's the one he climbed up, but because it's a prison, you can't just find the exact one, you know. So what I could find was this picture that shows you vaguely the size of the buildings. You can see he basically, there was some kind of scaffolding or something around the lower levels that was meant to be covered by metal, but he managed to run up it basically, and he literally just scaled the wall. He climbed all the way up to the top. Just went mad. When they were escorting him from one block to another, he just ran away from the guards and jumped up the scaffolding and climbed up the drain pipe to the top of the building, because he's incredibly physically fit as well. That's the other crazy thing about him. He does loads of press-ups. He does like thousands of press-ups and sit-ups and squats and that in his cell. He's like terrifyingly strong. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. The green and yellow jumpsuit. Yeah, that was, yeah, it is definitely, and it's done deliberately to humiliate them. But that's the size of the buildings he ran up. No, there's another one of him. Yes, because he climbed up onto the building and he ripped all those tiles off one by one and was winging them at the other buildings and smashing the buildings. If you look at his, if you read his book about Broadmoor, it was absolutely horrific, the conditions he was living under. And obviously no one would listen to them. They were considered criminally insane. So he couldn't just like tell people what was happening, you know. He had to do something extreme. And yeah, though I think what he did is a very extreme criminal damage in such a way. But I can understand his desperation, right? It's horrible. Like there was he was at high percentages of black men dying, young black men dying after being forcefully injected when they would, you know, when they had kicked off or whatever. And that was covered up, and there was sadistic doctors, and they were still using insulin therapy in Broadmoor in the 1980s, the thing where they knock you out into a coma with insulin and stuff like that in Broadmoor in the 80s. And, you know, horrific stuff. And the way he was treated, he was put in straitjackets and restraint belts and all this sort of shit, and horribly over-medicated. And, you know, and he was seeing this all happening. And he was in there when Robert Maudsley and another prisoner locked a guy in his cell. They barricaded the door shut so the guards couldn't get in, and they killed him with a plastic spoon. He stuck a plastic spoon in the guy's ear, and they split his head open. And they called him the brain eater. They said he ate the man's brain, but there's no actual evidence that he really did eat the man's brain. But they definitely smashed his head open and stabbed him in the brain. And Charles Bronson was in Broadmoor when that happened, so you can imagine how traumatic that must have been. Can't have felt very safe, can you, being in a prison where two lunatics did that? And also Jimmy Savile, Americans, you must have heard of Jimmy Savile, turned out to be a massive paedophile, terrifying scandal there, because he was like a big TV presenter for years. He was actually on entertainments in Broadmoor. He had the keys to all the buildings for Broadmoor, apparently, and could go in and do discos. And he remembers Jimmy Savile coming to do entertainment at Broadmoor. And he did time with Ronnie Cray in Broadmoor. In fact, there's quite a touching story. One of the rooftop protests that he did, I think it was the second one, he climbed up on the roof and he saw Ronnie Cray's mum coming in to visit. And she went and she shouted up to him, "You be careful up there," because apparently the Cray family loved Charles Bronson and always used to bring him stuff whenever they came to visit Ronnie, because Ronnie Cray was in Broadmoor as well. And Ronnie Cray really liked Charles Bronson. It's quite moving how these men all bond with each other and how friendly they were with each other, you know. But she saw him up on the roof and she shouted up to him, "You be careful up there." And he said to the staff, "Let the visits go ahead or I'll tear the roof up." Right? So they let the visits go ahead. They didn't cancel the visits because he was up on the roof. And he waited until he saw Ronnie Cray's mother leaving. And then he started to tear the roof up. crazy things like that. This is in his book, Broadmoor, My Journey into Hell. Yeah, and this is what he looked like. Yeah, because it's quite rare to see a picture of him with hair. That's the mugshot that he had when he moved into Broadmoor. Like I say, you go back into the other one, you can sort of, it looks like he has slightly longer hair. Can't really zoom in on them. I've posted these in my Facebook group. You can get them bigger. Yeah, and you can just Google these quite easily if you just go rooftop protest. Charles Bronson actually brings it up. Yeah, but though his name at the time when this was published in the newspapers, it would have been Michael Peterson, with his Broadmoor inmate goes wild or whatever. So basically, yeah. So after this, right, he's moved to Broadmoor from Parkhurst. And then he gets moved to Wakefield Prison, which is Monster Mansion, which is like our worst criminal asylum. It's where Robert Maudsley, the brain eater guy that I told you about in the last one, he's kept in the basement in a glass box and shit like that. In fact, Charles Bronson is supposed to have been kept in a cage in a glass box at certain points and all that when he was at Monster Mansion. I haven't found a part of his book yet where he talks about what it was like when he was in Wakefield. Yes, right. And this is the other crazy thing, right? 1984, right? So he goes through Broadmoor. He's apparently so insane he has to be in Broadmoor. Right, then they move him to Monster Mansion, which is like even worse than Broadmoor. Then suddenly, in 1987, they say, no, fine, you can go, right? They let him go, right? And he leaves prison, and he becomes a bare-knuckle fighter, right? A bare-knuckle boxer. So, like, that's illegal boxing as well, isn't it? You know, the fucking unlicensed boxing. And his promoter doesn't like his name because his name is Mickey Peterson. And so so for some reason, he gets him to change his name to Charles Bronson. And imagine that rep as a bare knuckle fighter, having been in, because he's been in Rampton, Broadmoor, and Wakefield, which are our like worst criminal insane asylums. And so like, yeah, that would be a good rep to have, wouldn't it, as a bare knuckle fighter? So you can see that. And but yeah, why the hell? Oh, sorry, I'm just. Oh no, I didn't sleep. Oh, I did sleep. So I've got this terrible cold. Yeah. But he goes and becomes a bare knuckle fighter, basically. 1987. But yeah, it lasts a little more than a year because he then goes and robs a jewellery store and gets sent back to... Yeah, this is where it gets confusing, right? 1987, he becomes a bare knuckle fighter, right? 1988, robs a jewellery store, pleads guilty when his partner snitches on him and becomes the main prosecution witness, basically. He's jailed again for another 7 years. And he gets released in 1992. Then he's locked up again after 50 days for conspiracy to rob. But then the charges get dismissed in 1993 and he's released again. But then he's arrested again for conspiracy to rob and possession of a sawn-off shotgun. And he's given 8 years. Right? So at some point, he's gone from being like the scariest bloke in the country, has to be in Broadmoor, Rampton, Wakefield. And they keep letting him go at this point in the 80s and early 90s. But then fucking suddenly, right, he's arrested again and put into prison. And 1994, he takes the deputy governor. Yeah, this is when he takes the governor hostage, and this is like the really serious thing. Takes the whole prison. Yeah, the deputy governor of whole prison, but he's the governor of the special unit that Charles Bronson's on, so it's his governor. Adrian Wallace hostage by tying him up. Yeah, he ties him up and beats him for 5 hours, and he gets 5 years for that. And then in 1999, this is when he takes the prison art teacher hostage for 43 hours. And one account I read said he beat and stabbed him, though another account I've read said he didn't physically harm him. But he got a life sentence for this because the man got PTSD. The man's never been the same again, like after it happened. It's so frightening for him. So this art teacher apparently criticised one of his paintings and he just absolutely lost his shit and kept him hostage for nearly 2 days. And some sources say he did beat and stab him. Other sources say he didn't physically harm him. It's just the fear of him. Because he does sound absolutely terrifying. He's very, very big and strong. And says terrifying things. He's very good at making terrifying threats. Yeah. Right, and then for some reason, on the 1st of September 2014, he changes his name from Bronson to Salvador. Most sources say it's because of Salvador Dali, because he's an artist. And he says in his book from Broadmoor about Broadmoor that he did it, to distance himself from the Charles Bronson image because he doesn't want to be associated with violence anymore. And Salvador means peace. Oh, excuse me, sorry. Got this cold, like I said. And yes, and then he marries this actress called Paula Williamson, who was in Coronation Street, and a few other things. Yeah, and it's quite a tragic story. Yeah, she married him. But their marriage quickly falls apart and was about to get annulled anyway, before she apparently tragically died after mixing drugs with alcohol. And there was no evidence that she was attempting suicide, though she had attempted suicide a couple of times. There's no sign that on this night she was. But apparently she was in a relationship with another man and that anyway. And her marriage to Charles Bronson was going to get annulled. But yeah, because he was her next of kin, because they were married, he got to be at her inquest. And so there's articles about that, and I'm reading a book about that all now as well. Yeah, sounds like a tragic situation there. And then, yes, the recent news for him now is in March 2023, he's got a public parole hearing, which is a historic event because we don't normally have public parole hearings in the UK, but there's been a rule change, and he's only the second prisoner ever to get this. But he's been denied it. On the day he bloody gets denied parole, right, there's this guy called George Bambi who's been claiming he's Charles Bronson's son for the past 6 years, and he's been on documentaries and he's visited Charles Bronson in this high security prison unit that he's in, and all this sort of stuff. And on the day that he gets denied parole, he's admitted that he's not really his son. He presented a fake DNA certificate to the prison service, and they bought it and believed it, and fucking basically, yeah, he's defrauded everyone, and he thinks he's just let's have a look at it. So I can't believe how blatantly the guy has just admitted it. Seems a bit foolhardy of him. Let's get this up. Yeah, this is Vanessa Feltz, by the way, for the Americans. This woman, she was like, I don't know, not Oprah, but maybe Ricky Lake or whatever. Yeah, she's a she's like a chat show presenter. But something went wrong with one of her shows. She got exposed for having fake guests or something. Yeah, probably about 2 decades ago, about in the late 90s, early 90s. She was a big shot TV presenter. Now she's like a... No, that's it. This is on local TV. This is Vanessa Feltz. But of all the people for him to have been saying this, so yeah, listen to this.
Years. Let's discuss this with Charles's son, George Bambi. Hello, George. How good to have you on the programme again. Good to see you.
I knew Vanessa. You nearly called me Charlie then.
I nearly did, didn't I? That was a slip of the tongue, a Freudian slip, definitely. So how do you feel about this latest development? I wonder if you're surprised, and I wonder if you're disappointed.
Right, I've got a really good exclusive for you now.
Good.
You're going to love this. You're going to love it, but you need to let me talk, all right? Is that a good deal?
Well, you might want to warn me how long you're thinking of talking for, and then I'll decide.
I'll be talking for a minute or so.
That'd be fine.
Charles Bronson approached me 6 years ago when he saw a TV programme, Confessions of the Paparazzi. He realised I was really good with the media, and he wanted me to get him on his side, to get him in the papers, and to get loads of publicity for him, and make sure he wasn't forgotten about. And obviously try and expose what was going through the prison service. So I went to visit him, and then I was banned from visiting him because I was a journalist with a press pass and all the rest of it. So me and Charlie together made up the story that he was my dad. Charles Bronson is not my father. I'm a PR agent, I'm a marketing person, and I'm the UK's #1 paparazzi, right? Not told anybody this for 6 years, and it's been an absolute bane of my life. The reason why I'm telling you now is because you're a lovely person. I've spoken to you on numerous occasions in the past, and I wanted to be able to speak rather than a newspaper do an interview and write a load of rubbish. Me and Charlie, for the last 6 years, have made loads of money, we've had loads of fun, we've created loads of stories, we've done loads of ridiculous things, we've manipulated the media, we've manipulated the prison service. I got into the maximum security facilities in 4 different prisons as a journalist. And not only did I do that, but I actually filmed him for 12 and a half hours And then I was already working with Channel 4 to do this big, massive expose documentary. I did everything with his knowledge, everything that he knew about, all the stories he knew about. I never did anything without speaking to him. Yeah, I made a lot of money from it, but Charlie's also, you know, he's got a little pot to one side with his business consultant. So anything that I've ever done, half of the money, I've had a business consultancy invoice me and pay them, and whatever they do with that money with Charlie is between them. Because obviously prisoners can't make money while they're in prison, they can't profit from the crimes. But he's not my father. The results coming today completely and utterly respect the parole board's decision. I think they've made, you know,
I don't know who was
a
recording
justified
this.
decision. We're talking about psychiatrists, parole board, psychologists, all these people. Don't forget, the last 6 years I've been visiting Charlie every 2 weeks. I've been at his management meetings, I've been everywhere. So a lot of people online, all these, you know, keyboard warriors that are saying, oh, let's all fight and let's all bring Charlie home. He deserves to be home and all this. They talk about him as if he's some sort of war hero. He's not. He's a prisoner that's done some really, really bad things. And he's been in prison for 49 years. And I would love for him to get out and have an opportunity to get freedom. But completely respect what the parole board said today. But as far as mine and Charlie's relationship goes anymore, that's it. I've finished. I worked with him for 6 years. I promised him I'd get him a public parole hearing. Promised I'd get him a new legal team. I promised for the last 6 years I'd get him in all the papers and get loads of publicity for him and make sure that he wasn't forgotten about. We did a programme on Channel 4 a couple of weeks ago where he had the best opportunity of his life to be able to have his word and tell the world about what's been going on in the prison. And during that documentary, he knew he was being filmed because we'd already been planning it for months. And he chose to go on that programme and start talking about sticking a tomato sauce bottle in someone's head. That was absolutely gobsmacked. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the programme, there was a little bit on there where they asked me how I would feel if Charlie came out of prison, came to live with me. And I actually said, well, I don't know what he's going to be like. I've never seen him out of prison. He might stab me with a bread knife and pick the head out of me or whatever. And then I went on to say, but I don't think he'd do that. He'd probably stab me with a paintbrush because he's an artist now. He went absolutely nuts. We had a massive fallout, and that's it. We've had loads of fallouts in the past, but that's it. There's no going back. I'm never having any dealings with him again whatsoever in my life. I wish him the best of luck. As a person, visiting him and spending loads and loads, I've spent more time with him than anybody else in the last 6 years. He's a really, really lovely guy. He does a lot of stuff for charity.
Right, and there is more, right? But I can't believe how blatantly that guy's just sat there and admitted that he lied about being his son, and well, we'll get into it because there's more. There's more. Wait a minute, no, it's gone to another bloody thing. Damn Facebook. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, he does. There's more to it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find the rest of his videos. But basically, he goes on to say, he is not going to answer his messages anymore. He's not going to talk to him anymore at all, basically. So he's just used him until he'd made his bit of money. And that's it, basically. And that's quite arrogant for him to sit there and say, I promised him I'd get him a public parole hearing. Fucking the public parole hearing happened because there's been a law change in this country. And there's always been public interest in this guy's case, so he was probably going to get a public parole hearing anyway. He didn't need this cunt to get him a public parole hearing. How dare he sit there and make out that he's the one that got him a public parole hearing. And yeah, I haven't seen this documentary that he did for Channel 4 yet, but yeah, I think it's still up on 4 On Demand. Hopefully it will end up on YouTube at some point. But no, the point really is the reason that they won't release him is because he can't be tested, because there aren't enough guards. There's a shortage of guards in the prison that he's in, which is Wood Hill at the moment, I think. And he's in a Category A special segregation unit, I think. And he only gets out for an hour a day. And so he's got no chance at the moment. How is he supposed to prove that he can, interact with others if he doesn't ever get the chance to? It's just ridiculous, isn't it? And I found a report on Wakefield Prison. No, sorry, not Wakefield, sorry. Woodhill, the one that he's in now. Going back to like 20. Where is it? Yeah, it's talking about the staff shortages, and if you read all the articles about his parole hearing, here it is, staffing crisis at HMP Woodhill. Yeah. Is that showing up? No, yet. There we go. Talking here, inspectors returning to HMP Woodhill found an establishment struggling to make progress due to severe staffing shortages. The staffing position was no better than it had been at the time of the inspection in 2021, with as many staff leaving the prison as joining. Inspectors were concerned that the staff shortages, inexperience, and high turnover were limiting what the jail could achieve and were negatively affecting outcomes for prisoners. In 2021, the Category B training prison, which also holds Category A remand prisoners and operates several specialist units, making it a high-risk and complex jail, was deemed unsafe and incapable of providing its population with a purposeful regime. Inspectors returned to the Milton Keynes jail in June 2022 for an independent review of progress, IRP, and followed up 8 recommendations, finding insufficient progress in 4. Ofsted followed up on 3 themes, judging progress to be reasonable in 2 and insufficient in 1. Commenting on the findings, Charlie Taylor, Chief Inspector of Prisons, said, in most areas, leaders and managers demonstrated a will and desire to improve outcomes for prisoners and also for staff. Much of their effort was, however, thwarted by staff shortages. Time out of cell was not good enough at around 2.5 hours a day for the many unemployed and underemployed prisoners. Workshops and classes were not operating to capacity, and colleagues at Ofsted found limited participation in education, skills and classes. However, the jail had made progress in its identification of individual learning needs through an initial assessment, induction pack, and learning difficulties and disabilities screener on arrival. Some progress has been made to reduce violence and self-harm levels, and it was promising that data indicated that self-harm was now on a downward trajectory. Staff were receiving training across a range of safety procedures, and safety leadership were using data more effectively to understand the causes of violence and self-harm. However, levels remain too high against comparator prisons. The staffing crisis was the single most limiting factor to progress at Woodhill. Mr. Taylor acknowledged the challenge of recruitment, stating, the scale of the task is huge, but I would strongly urge leaders to continue in their quest to find creative and practical solutions to make Woodhill an attractive employer. Without continued vigour, it is inevitable that the outcomes for the prison and the public will deteriorate even further. So yeah, basically, that's why he's not getting out. Oh God, is there high winds? We've had high winds here. Change of subject. Yeah, it has been really well. Yesterday, it was worse yesterday. Yes, we're talking about Charles Bronson today. Well, Charles Salvador, as he calls himself now, one of our biggest high-profile prisoners. And the sort of crazy situation he's in. But yeah, he's like another rabbit hole. I might even write to him at some point, but at the moment, there's no point. There's thousands of people writing to him every day. He'll never fucking even see the letter. If I try to write to him now, he's probably snowed under with letters in his cell. Maybe one day. But yeah, he gets a lot of people writing to him, obviously. But yeah, it is. His book. He's written a lot of books though, and his voice is quite compelling. This is another reason why the government, the prison service, don't want him being interviewed too much. I suppose is because he is quite eloquent and he can talk about. But at the same time, I think the prison service acknowledged, the problem with him, and they're not like trying to deny it or cover it up anymore. And they are sorry because there's no one who's currently in the prison service whose fault this is. You know what I mean? This is the fault of because he's like a product of the way the prison service was back in the 70s when they showed absolutely no compassion and they treated people who showed criminal behaviour like animals, literally. And it really wasn't on the way they treated him. They acknowledge this in the end of his parole report. They say he has PTSD because of the unacceptable treatment that he suffered. And it is horrific. I don't know if he's written a children's book. I've heard that though in some fucking weird parallel universe. He did do that. Yeah, I've not found anything about that while I was researching it, but he might have written a fucking children's book. I think that was someone else. I think there might be someone else who's actually released now. Because Charles Bronson hasn't been released since the early 90s. But yeah, that's the other crazy thing about him as well. When I was researching him, I was like, what? So he was so crazy he had to be in Broadmoor and Rampton and Wakefield. But then you let him out for a year. But now he's so fucking crazy, he's got to be in Category A. So it's like, well, fucking, what the hell is your prison system doing to him then? You know what I mean? Got a feeling it's them. It's that he just can't keep away from those gangs of robbers when he's out of prison. That's the thing. You've got to steer him away from the gangs of robbers. It is. Oh, what was I saying? Yeah. There's more that I've missed out as well. The crazy events that he's done. He because I couldn't find what year he did it. That's why I haven't put it on the timeline yet. But he took the prison librarian hostage, and for that one he stripped naked and rubbed butter all over himself. He hoarded up butter in his cell deliberately so he could do it. And he stripped himself naked and rubbed himself down with butter, and he apparently made the librarian help him rub butter all over his body, so that when the guards had to restrain him, he'd slip out of their arms. They couldn't restrain him. Yeah, and it did apparently make it really hard for the guards to restrain him. That's how crazy he was. And I was just reading, I've got one of his books on Kindle. I'll try and find it. He was so mental. He did stuff like one day he walked into a room with a glass bottle, a pop bottle, a fizzy drink bottle, and said to the guys in the room, I want one of you to bottle me. And he's like known to be like the craziest prisoner in the known universe. Of course, all the blokes go, "Oh no, Charlie, we won't do that to you. Why would we do that to you?" And he goes, "All right then," and he bottled himself. And went, "Right, guys, and thanks," and just walked out the room bleeding like fuck. Yeah, fucking that's how crazy he was. He bottled himself. Covered himself with butter, and so the guards couldn't grip him as he was being restrained. Yeah, and he talks about what it's like to be held put in a straight jacket and these restraint belts. Did it make the guards really hard when they tried to restrain him? Yeah. Once they was all greased up. Keep it greasy so we won't go down. Frank Zappa reference there. There's another weirdly in the Kindle book I was just reading. He was saying one of his prison mates was really into Frank Zappa. So I wonder if he's heard Keep It Greasy then. He must have done. It was Joe's Garage. Second, that's Act 2 though. You have to be a pretty dedicated Zappa fan to listen to Act 2 of Joe's Garage. Yeah, but that's the kind of crazy thing he does. He, bottles himself for attention. So the diagnosis as well. This is interesting as well because they diagnosed him as a psychopath and schizophrenic. They said he was schizophrenic, right? But fucking nowadays, psychopath that ain't even a diagnosis anymore. Nowadays, they'd say you have antisocial personality disorder, and if he was a psychopath, they'd say antisocial personality disorder with zero capability for empathy. But I think they're wrong. I think he had some capability for empathy. But the us and them attitude of the psychiatrist against Charles Bronson fucking made him have absolutely no empathy for them because so I think he was what they would have called a sociopath. So he could repress empathy in certain situations, and when he was up against psychiatrists and that, he would have totally repressed his empathy. So to them, he would have looked like a psychopath. But I don't think he really was, and he really is a psychopath. But he definitely has antisocial personality disorder, as you know, and he definitely likes violence, doesn't he? And likes being violent. But they didn't help him, did they, when they should have helped him? And he was actually calling out for help when he was acting up, and instead of helping him. They just made it worse. They just made it worse constantly, didn't they? Tragic. And now they can't help him because there's not enough staff. Basically, there's nothing they can do. Now he's like 70 years old and he's just quiet. Though apparently he still runs around the yard. He gets out for a day. He gets out for an hour a day. And he runs around the yard and does his push-ups and that. He's still mega fit, still like terrifyingly strong and fit. And if you look up Dave, well, I don't know what's his name, Dave Courtney's channel. No, Dave Courtney on Facebook, yeah, is where he posts the videos. But Charles Bronson rings him, and he records the phone calls and actually hear him talking. Yeah. Last night he's saying, "Please release me." On the day of he got denied parole. Dave Courtney asked him to sing "Please Release Me," and he's saying, "Please release me." Oh, hello. Oh, yes, this is a crazy one as well. I've said most of what I was going to say, but you can watch it on replay. Yeah, interesting British prisoner. Because people always are asking me, is there like any prisoners you can compare to the Manson case, the Manson murders? And there isn't really, but there are prisoners you can compare to Manson maybe. But compared to Charles Bronson, Manson was a pussy, you know what I mean? But Manson wasn't physically as strong as Charles Bronson. I think if Charles Manson was as strong as Charles Bronson, he would have done shit like this. But yeah, he wasn't capable of it. But no, Charles Bronson is a nutter, you know, works out, does thousands of push-ups and sit-ups every day, was insanely strong. That's why he was so terrifying. Could take on all the guards and all that. He was fucking fitter than most of the guards, you know. Yeah, well, she's an interesting one. Yeah, Joanna Dennehy. She's a really scary one. Yeah, because she just remorselessly went out and murdered people. And that's a woman with antisocial personality disorder as well. Yeah, and she really was chilling. Yeah, because there's the footage of her when she's arrested, laughing with the police officers and that after she's gone out, and a surviving victim as well. One of the men she stabbed didn't die. He remembered it. Yeah, and so he can describe it, just how terrifying it was. Next, do people know who Joanna Dennehy is? Do everyone know who Joanna Dennehy was? Yeah, she was just a woman that was like, you know, hit rock bottom in her life or whatever, alcoholic, but she was a sadistic psycho, obviously. And I think initially she killed one of the roommates in the house that she lived in, and then she like bullied another guy into driving her around. And she was jumping out the car and just killing random men, just jumping out the car and stabbing random men to death. I think she got about 4 men. And the last one survived. She didn't kill him, but oh yeah, it's horrific. You know what I mean? Yeah, and she just and then when they arrested her, yeah, she's totally remorseless, basically over it. Yeah, she's terrifying. Another British case. I should talk about her. Yeah, I'm more of a historic true crime thing though, aren't I? But I suppose that is quite old now. That is an old case. British case, they're very scary. And there's just recently been another case where there was a woman with, because Joanna Dennehy had a face tattoo. She had something tattooed on her face. There was a new woman that's just murdered her boyfriend, who was supposed to be a true crime obsessive. Made every true crime fan look like a psycho again. Bastards. For God's sake, people with antisocial personality disorder who can't control your violent impulses. Learn to control your violent impulses. Come on, Charlie and Joanna. Behave yourselves. Yeah, no, look at the size of that building. Bloody hell. Imagine that, though. Right, from the ground. He ran from the guards faster than the guards could run after him. And he manages to just climb up the building, grabbing a drain pipe. And he talked about how the drain pipe was like rusting off the wall and it was terrifying. And he thought he was going to die. And he couldn't believe he made it, but he did. He made it up onto the roof. Look how tall those buildings are. Mad bastard. Well, there he is. Yeah, he got up there. What's wrong with it? Looks like he's laying down. No, it's that one. Sorry, it's this one that I'm looking at. Yeah. He's actually got one of his legs extended there. It's really weird. He's falling. Yeah, he's doing like a If we go back to the front cover, you can see that picture bigger. Yeah. It was Hell Satan. Maybe he was into Dio. Holy Dave. We've been down too long in the midnight sea. Yes. Yeah, Jonah Dennehy was a scary one. Right. Well, I've read out everything I was going to read out. I've got loads of books on this guy anyway. I would like to for things. Well, I'm going to definitely update you on what happens with that George Bambi matey, or whatever the fuck he's called. Is it George? Dave Bambi? Can't remember. Yeah, but the Bambi mate is the guy that's his fake son, right? Because he seems very, very arrogant about this, and he thinks he's just going to walk away, having with no consequences. But I think that actually it's quite bad what he's done, and he's not just going to get away with it. Because that's a security problem for the bloody prison. It makes the security of the prison look a bit ridiculous, doesn't it? So he'll be in trouble. And I think Charles Bronson, well, the prisoner himself, Charles Salvador, he's a vulnerable person in this situation, so he can't do the consequences must fall more on this George Bambi me, because he's exploited the vulnerable prisoner more than the prisoners, whatever. But no, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I don't think he's just going to walk away from that as easily as he thinks he is. I think that's actually quite a serious matter what he's done. The fucking presenting a false document to say that he's Charles Bronson's son when he wasn't. I don't think he's just going to get away with that. But yeah, what I'll do is I'll end this stream now and I'll do an after stream for a little while. I haven't got that much of a crowd though, so probably won't do that for very long. But thanks for coming, everyone, anyway. And I will do more updates on him as more happens. And also I'm reading more books about him. I'll probably do some readings of his stuff at some point as well, because he is quite a character. This stream was just a general introduction to who he is and that. But I want to read out more of his, and maybe play clips of him actually talking. Because though we mustn't romanticize him, and we mustn't romanticize the things he's done, and we mustn't look at him like he's done nothing wrong, because he has done some very, very horrible and violent things. He is actually still quite his character, the way he is, he's an intelligent man, and he's a broken bloke. You know what I mean? I think he had some kind of breakdown, and he needed help. And instead of giving him help, he just got a load of abuse from very, very disturbed, nasty psychiatrists at the time. And it was just the state of the penal system at the time created this man, and he shouldn't be as bad as he is now. And so this is why they can't let this man just die in prison. They've got to do something for this man, right? Because he is not like the Cray twins. He is not like Ronnie Biggs. He was someone who fucking needed help, and he just got abuse and nothing but abuse. And this is what put him in the condition that he's in now. And they can't just let this man die in prison. People won't let it happen. It's sad. And he's now got to wait another 2 years before he can be up for parole again. And I hope that what this George Bambi does doesn't come back on him too badly. It shouldn't come back on him, because he's the vulnerable person in this situation who's been abused. But they could take it out on him and say, oh, no, you was involved in this deception, because he was involved in the deception. Obviously, because he claimed, he said, okay, I believe you're my son, when he knew fully well that the guy wasn't his son. So, yeah, but did he understand how serious what the guy was doing was? All that sort of thing. Yeah, but anyway, I'll wrap this up now, and I'll do a after stream, and we'll chat for a little while, and I'll get into more random stuff. Thank you for coming, everyone. And yeah, like and subscribe if you're watching this on replay and you haven't already. And like I say, we'll talk more about Charles Bronson in the future. And look at my Charles Manson videos, my Charles Manson playlist of all the different crimes they committed, because they didn't just commit 2 nights of crime, they committed loads of different crimes. Crazy story. So quite a rabbit hole, people. Excellent, yeah. Well, thanks for coming, everyone, and I'll start up again straight away and do a bit of an after stream, and then nicey night. Okay.